On the record, this is the videotaped deposition of David Bernier, being taken in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Today is November 7th, 2019. Time on the record is approximately 10:12 a.m. Eastern Time. This time will the attorneys please identify themselves and affiliations for the record, and then our court reporter will swear the witness.
Jeb Butler on behalf of Dan Gilreath.
Ramsey Prather on behalf of Dan Gilreath.
Matthew Davidson on behalf of Tri-State Concrete and Tracy Wayne Moore.
And Perry Miles on behalf of FCA US LLC, and appearing here with me is Brian Baggett, Senior Counsel at FCA US LLC.
Would you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give the truth and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes. Mr. Bernier, you and I met just before the deposition. My name is Jeb Butler, as you know. Tell us, if you would, what your name and position with FCA is.
Currently?
Yes.
Okay. David Bernier. I'm a product analysis engineer, and what I do is assist the general counsel on as the engineering side for investigating accidents and claims against FCA.
Assist the general counsel, you said?
Yes, I work with the general counsel.
That'd be the main lawyer for FCA, right?
Yes.
How long have you worked with FCA or Chrysler before that?
I have worked for FCA for 25, almost 26 years.
And you've given depositions before, I think.
Yes, I have.
In fact, in a previous case, you testified last year in another case arising out of a Jeep fire called White against FCA, right?
Yes.
And in that case, you were selected to testify on behalf of FCA on certain recall-related topics. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you have long been involved, I think, with litigation and with recalls. Is that right?
I've been involved with recalls for roughly 7 years. And
Okay.
litigation with my work at product analysis for roughly 2.5 years.
I think it was at one point your title Recall Administration Manager.
Yes.
And then in that capacity, or at least in some, you used to generate recall documentation to present to the federal government and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, right?
Yes, we would generate the owner letters, and we would generate the recall repair procedures.
And then you used to be, going back to the 1990s, you were a product engineer, if I understand it correctly. Is that right?
Yes, I worked in airbags for what we termed at the time large car platform.
I'll hand you now what's been marked as plaintiff's exhibit number 40. And we don't need to go through it in detail, but is that your LinkedIn page?
Yes.
And then do you live here in the Detroit, Michigan area?
Yes, I live in Rochester Hills.
And we're here in the Detroit area taking your deposition today, correct?
Yes.
Why did the 2002 to 2007 Jeep Liberties have to be recalled?
It was an agreement between the federal government, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and FCA.
Well, what was the problem?
The problem, there was no safety defect ever identified for this vehicle.
Don't recalls normally address a problem?
It depends what type of recall we're talking about.
A safety recall normally addresses a problem. Would you agree with that?
A safety recall normally would be handling a safety defect, but this particular recall, a safety defect was never identified.
Are you saying that well, let me just ask you this way. Do you concede that there was a problem with the rear tank Jeeps and the 2002 to 2007 Liberties?
Objection, foundation.
I'm stating that there is never a defect, a safety defect identified for the Jeep Liberties.
Was there a problem with them or not?
Same objection, foundation.
When you state problem, I don't know what that means. I'm stating that there is no safety defect for that particular vehicle.
So is it your testimony then that FCA conducted a recall on a vehicle that had no problem?
FCA conducted a safety recall as a negotiation with NHTSA.
The question I'm trying to get to is whether you agree there was a problem with the vehicle or whether you don't. Are you going to answer that question?
Objection form. Asked and answered.
I'm stating that there was never a safety defect identified in the vehicle.
Well, would you agree that the gas tank in the 2002-2007 Liberties was dangerously exposed?
Objection. Foundation.
I am not a fuel tank engineer, so I don't feel that I'm able to answer that question.
You were involved in the recall process and administering the recall of the 2002-2007 Liberties, right?
The administration of the recall, yes, correct.
Okay. Did you realize or think about whether the gas tank in those vehicles was exposed to rear impact?
That is outside the scope of my position as a recall administration manager.
Well, let's look at some pictures and see if that gets us anywhere. I want to show you now what's been marked as Plans Exhibit number 28. And I'm handing copies to all the lawyers here. Do you recognize the vehicle shown in the two pictures on Plans Exhibit 28 as a 2002 to 2007 Jeep Liberty?
Yes.
Now, obviously, the vehicle wasn't made with a red gas tank, so what happened here is we wrapped red tape around the gas tank so that it would be more visible for the pictures. Do you see the gas tank there with the red tape around it?
Yes.
Do you agree that that gas tank is exposed?
Objection. Foundation. Beyond the witness's expertise.
I can state that I can see the red tape that you put around the fuel tank.
Yes, I see the red tape also. My question is, do you agree that that gas tank in Plans Exhibit 28 is exposed to rear impact?
Objection. Foundation. Calls for an opinion from an expert, or from an expert, and the witness has said he doesn't have expertise in this area.
As I stated, I am not a fuel tank engineer, nor am I a structural engineer.
Well, you don't have to be an engineer to see the gas tank in Plans Exhibit 28, do you?
Objection. Argumentative.
As I previously stated, I can see the red tape that is representing the fuel tank.
Do you agree that it is exposed from the rear?
Same objection. Asked and answered.
As I stated, I can see the red tape of the fuel tank, around the fuel tank.
Well, that's still not an answer. So let me show you something else, and we'll see if we can get any closer with a comparison. I'm going to hand you now what I've marked as Plans Exhibit number 97. Now, I'll represent to you that Plans Exhibit 97 is the front page and then an excerpt from a brochure for the 1999 Dodge Durango. I've got a copy of the brochure with me, but it's hard for a court reporter to make copies of a full brochure, so I pulled these excerpts. Anyway, on the front, do you see the picture of the 99 Durango, the words 99 Durango, and the Dodge logo there?
And before you answer, just for the record, Mr. Butler, I'm going to object to the first phrase of this question.
What was it?
That's not it. You said that's not an answer. I'm objecting to that comment as being part of the question.
Oh, okay. So subject to that, the question now pending is whether you see on the front of Plans Exhibit 98 the words 1999 Durango, a picture of the Dodge Durango, and the Dodge logo.
I see that on Exhibit 97.
And Dodge is an FCA brand and was a Chrysler brand before that, right?
Dodge is a brand of Chrysler, yes.
And now Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, right?
Yes.
All right. Now turn with me to the second page of Exhibit 97. And for comparison's sake, look at the bottom right there. You see that highlighted language?
Yes.
Doesn't that say the fuel tank, biggest in class at 25 gallons, is mounted securely between the frame rails and ahead of the rear axle?
Yes, that is highlighted.
Okay. And then we can see a picture of it if we look on the left side of the second page of Plans Exhibit 97. You see like the overview of the 1999 Dodge Durango there?
Yes.
Do you see the gas tank?
Yes, I do.
The gas tank is across from the muffler, and the gas tank's that long black object with a silver circle in the middle of it, right?
Yes.
Now, if you look at that second page of Plans Exhibit 97 and you compare it to Plans Exhibit 28, can you tell us which of those gas tanks is more exposed?
Objection. Foundation.
I can't tell if you can see the fuel tank from behind the Dodge Durango.
You can't tell?
No, I don't know if you could see that or not.
Well, then let's take a closer look at the Dodge Durango. We've identified the gas tank before, right?
Yes.
And on one side of the gas tank you have a frame rail, and on the other side you have a frame rail and a muffler. Is that correct?
That's what it appears to be, a muffler. We'll make that assumption that that's the muffler.
Okay, well anyway, there's a frame rail on each side, right?
Yes, there is.
And then behind the gas tank in the 99 Durango, second page of Plans Exhibit 97, there's a rear axle, right?
Yes.
And even behind that there's a spare tire, right?
Yes.
And behind that there's a bumper, right?
What appears to be a bumper, correct.
Now, and then look again at Plans Exhibit 28. There's not a rear axle behind the gas tank, is there?
In Exhibit 28,
Right.
I do not see the axle behind the red tape around the fuel tank.
So can you tell us which gas tank is more exposed, the one in the 1999 Durango in Plans Exhibit 97, or the one in the 2002 to 2007 Liberty in Plans Exhibit 28?
Objection. Foundation. Beyond the witness's expertise.
As stated before, I can see the red tape that's on the Jeep Liberty. I do not know if I can see the fuel tank behind the Dodge Durango. This
Okay.
picture does not give a representation of the rear of the vehicle as is Exhibit 28.
Which gas tank do you think is safer?
I can't answer that question. I am not a fuel tank or a structural engineer.
As a matter of common sense, can you tell the jury which gas tank is safer in rear impact, the one in Plans Exhibit 28 or the one in Plans Exhibit 97?
I can't answer that question. I am not a structural engineer or a fuel tank engineer. But our vehicles, the Jeep Liberty, pass all federal regulations.
Isn't it true that the Pinto also passed all federal regulations?
Objection. Foundation.
I can't answer that question. I did not work on the Ford Pinto.
Okay, well, let's look at some more pictures here. We've established that the gas tank in that 1999 Durango in Plans Exhibit 97 was sort of across from the muffler, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to show you some more pictures of the underside of the 2002 to 2007 Jeep Liberty. And specifically what I'm showing you now is marked as Plans Exhibit 1003, and I'll just represent to you this document was given to us by Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, and this is a PowerPoint put together by FCA's hired witness Thomas Pearl. Do you see on the front page of Exhibit 1003 the words Gilreath, D, crash?
Yes.
Okay. Turn with me, if you would, to the third page. Now, I suspect without me saying anything, you would know what you're looking at, but for the sake of clarity, the picture on the bottom of page 3, the orange one, shows an undamaged Jeep Liberty, and the one on the top shows the actual Jeep Liberty, in this case with the damage represented. Do you see that?
I see the difference between the blue and the orange, yes.
Okay. So everything on here was done by FCA's person except these two labels, which I put on there yesterday. You see the location A and location B that I put on there?
Yes.
Now, location A goes to a circle, and that circle's around the gas tank of the Liberty, isn't it?
It appears to be the fuel tank, yes.
And location B, that box, is on an area across from the muffler, right?
Yes.
Now, if you were going to be involved in a rear impact in this Jeep Liberty, where would you rather the gas tank be, location A or location B?
Objection, foundation.
Again, I am not a fuel tank engineer or a rear structural engineer to be able to state where a fuel tank should be placed on a vehicle.
I mean, isn't it a matter of common sense, though, sir, that location B is safer in rear impact than location A?
Objection, foundation.
Again, I don't have the expertise in that area to be able to distinguish where the fuel tank should be located on a vehicle.
Well, let's turn to page 7 of this Exhibit 1003, the PowerPoint put together by FCA's hired witness, Thomas Pearl. Are you on page 7?
Yes.
I'll represent to you that this is a photograph taken by Mr. Pearl of the underside of Deanna Gilreath's Jeep Liberty after the collision. Do you see the muffler there?
Yes.
Do you see the bent trailer hitch there?
I see metal that's been damaged. I'm assuming that's the trailer hitch.
Well, I'll take that. And then I put on these labels and these arrows for location A and location B. And my question is whether this helps you answer the question as to whether in rear impact, location A or location B is a safer place for a gas tank.
Objection, again, foundation.
As I stated, I am not a fuel tank or a structural engineer to be able to tell you where a fuel tank should be located on a vehicle.
Am I understanding correctly that your testimony is you're unable to testify as to whether location A or location B would be safer in rear impact?
Objection, asked and answered.
Again, as I stated, that is outside of my scope. I am not a fuel tank engineer or a structure engineer.
So you don't know?
I can't tell you where the fuel tank should be located on a vehicle, no.
Now, we've talked a little bit about the recall of the 2002-2007 Jeep Liberties, right?
Yes.
And that recall basically involved putting on trailer hitches, correct?
Yes.
I want to talk with you a little bit about that trailer hitch. Take that PowerPoint put together by FCA's witness, that is Plan Exhibit 1003, and turn to page 5 with me. You know, this is kind of similar to the ones we looked at before. In orange on the left, you see the undamaged 02 to 07 Liberty, and on the right, you see the actual vehicle driven by Deanna Gilreath with the rear axle sort of put back in place. Is that correct?
Objection, foundation.
I see a picture of the undercarriage of a Jeep Liberty with a black. It looks like a rear axle and tires.
Okay, on the left you see the diagram of an undamaged vehicle. On the right you see the diagram of a damaged vehicle. Do you agree?
Yes.
You know what a differential cover is, right?
Yes.
It's like a pumpkin-sized container on a rear axle that holds a bunch of gears, right?
Yes.
And here on page 5 of Plan Exhibit 1003, you can see I've labeled the trailer hitch receiver and the differential cover. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, that trailer hitch receiver, that's the piece that got added as a result of the recall, right?
Yes.
Did you know that in this collision, the trailer hitch receiver bent forward and speared the back of the differential cover?
No.
Okay, we'll turn to page 10 in this same exhibit, Plaintiff's Exhibit 1003, the Pearl PowerPoint. And here we see a differential cover, right?
Appears to be the rear, yes. Mhm.
And this label was not put on by me. This is by FCA's person. Read that label into the record for us, if you would.
Impacted by Jeep Hitch receiver.
Okay, so that tells us that the Hitch receiver struck this differential cover, right?
That is what is written on this slide.
Okay, go back to page 5. Now, based on the images on page 5 of Mr. Pearl's PowerPoint, Plaintiff's Exhibit 1003, what important object did the trailer hitch receiver have to pass through before it could strike the differential cover?
Objection, foundation. This witness has not investigated this crash. Questions about the specific crash are inappropriate.
I can't tell what the trailer hitch would have come in contact with.
Well, let's look then at the picture on the left side. There, the orange picture. And here's the question: what important object is located between the trailer hitch receiver and the differential cover?
On the picture on the left, there is a fuel tank.
A fuel tank is between the trailer hitch receiver and the differential cover, right?
Objection, foundation.
I see a picture of a fuel tank.
And on these 2002, 2007 Liberties, that fuel tank was made of plastic, wasn't it?
I do not remember what the material is. I did not release that component, so.
Would you be surprised to learn that the gas tank on the 02 to 07 Liberty was made of plastic?
Would I be surprised?
That's the question, yes.
No, I would not be surprised.
Okay. Let me show you now what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 2. And I'll represent to you, this is another picture of an 02 to 07 Liberty with the gas tank wrapped in red tape. Do you see what appears to be the gas tank in red tape there?
Yeah, yes, excuse me.
And isn't it true that Plaintiff's Exhibit 2 confirms that the important object between the trailer hitch receiver and the differential cover is that gas tank?
Same objection.
I will state that the fuel tank is in the location behind the trailer hitch.
It was between the trailer hitch and the differential cover, right?
Well, part of the fuel tank is between the trailer hitch and the differential.
Okay. Let me ask you this, since you worked on the recall. If the trailer hitch speared through the plastic gas tank to strike the differential cover, that's not a good thing, is it?
Objection, form,
You're,
foundation.
again, that's outside of my scope. That is a structural engineer's responsibility. That is not my responsibility as a recall administration manager.
Based on your work on the recall, would you agree that a trailer hitch spearing a gas tank is bad?
Same
Again,
objection.
I am not a fuel tank engineer or a structural engineer to answer that question. My job was, and the recall manager, was to generate the repair procedures and to generate the owner letters that went out to each customer.
As a matter of common sense, would you think it would be a good thing or a bad thing for a trailer hitch to spear a gas tank?
Same objection.
I don't know. I can answer that question. I don't have the expertise.
If you or your loved one was riding in a Jeep Liberty, would you like it if the trailer hitch speared the gas tank?
I wouldn't like it. I don't know how I can answer that question.
Is a recall supposed to make a vehicle safer or more dangerous?
A recall, a safety recall, is normally established to correct the safety defect. But again, this recall was not, there was a safety defect was never identified.
The question was whether a safety recall is supposed to make a vehicle safer or more dangerous.
A safety recall is to correct the safety defect.
Isn't it true, sir, that FCA has known since the early 2000s that putting a trailer hitch behind a rear-mounted gas tank was dangerous?
Objection, foundation.
I don't have the expertise to answer that question. Our vehicle passed all regulations at the time, including rear impacts, with and without the trailer hitch. That I do know.
Well, isn't it true that by the early 2000s, specifically 2002, Chrysler was running tests looking for a safer alternative to trailer hitches for these rear tank Jeeps?
Same objection.
I don't know the answer to that. I was not part of the investigation, or nor was I part of the engineering team that works on fuel tanks or structures.
Well, you've mentioned a couple times that, in your opinion, the Liberty passed all the federal minimum standards and passed those tests, right?
The Jeep Liberty passed all federal requirements for the vehicle to be sold in the United States.
To do that, it would have to pass the 301 tests, right?
Yes.
Okay, so isn't it true that as early as 2002, Chrysler was running tests looking for a safer alternative to the trailer hitch?
I don't know that. I did not work in those areas.
Well, did FCA think about what would happen in an accident when it decided to conduct this recall that involved putting trailer hitches on a bunch of Jeeps?
Objection, form, and foundation.
That's, again, outside of my scope.
Let me make sure we got the question clear, because respectfully, I would not think it was beyond your scope. The question was, did FCA think about what would happen in an accident when it decided to conduct this recall that involved putting trailer hitches on a bunch of Jeeps?
I do not come up with the corrective action for a recall. I implement the corrective action, generate the repair instructions, and generate the owner letter.
Did you talk to the people who decided what to do?
I did not come up with this corrective action.
Well, that wasn't the question. Did you talk to people about it?
Did I talk to people about the corrective action?
Yeah.
Well, of course we talked about the corrective action.
Okay. Well, did y'all ever discuss what was happening in the real world to real Jeeps that were getting hit in the rear?
I did not have those conversations.
You never talked about
that is outside of my scope. That's part of the investigation and engineering. Engineering determines what the corrective action is for a recall.
So your testimony is you never talked to anybody about what was happening in the real world. Is that right?
Objection. Argumentative, asked and answered.
Is that right, or did I
That
get
is
it wrong?
outside of my scope. I talked with the engineering and the investigation team of when they establish what the corrective action is.
Do you think what happens in the real world to these Jeeps is important?
Do I think that? Of course, things that happen in the real world are important.
Well, let's look, since we just looked at that crash test, let's look next at some real world pictures. Are you familiar with the Jeep fire involving Miss Erin Nevitt in the year 2010?
No.
Do you recall the case in which a 30-year-old woman was burned and disfigured in a Jeep Liberty fire in 2010?
Objection, form, and foundation.
No, I don't. Just by that information, no.
Okay, well, let's look at a picture from that case. I'll show you what's been marked as plaintiff's exhibit number 32. Now, I'll represent to you, this is a picture that comes from FCA's own files. You can't read it very clearly, but do you see what appears to be some red text over there on the middle right of the page?
Yes.
I know it's hard to read. I'll represent to you. It says Walden against Chrysler and then gives a Bates number. But anyway,
Well,
were
I'm
you...
going to object to the form of the question in the sense that you're referencing other cases. But I just want to get that objection, so you can start your question.
Okay, have you seen this picture before?
No.
Did you look at pictures like Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 in connection with this recall?
No, was not part of the investigation team.
Well, did you know, or did anyone tell you that the Nevitt family filed a lawsuit against Fiat Chrysler arising out of this collision?
Objection form, foundation.
I don't have that knowledge, no. No one, I don't remember anybody discussing that a case like that.
Well, anyway, what happened to the trailer hitch that's shown in Plaintiff's Exhibit 32?
Objection form, foundation. Calls for speculation.
You're asking for me to answer questions that are outside my scope of expertise. I am not a rear structure engineer. I am not a trailer hitch engineer.
Well, I mean, you can see the page that you're holding, can't you?
Yes, I can.
Okay, what happened to the trailer hitch?
Same objections.
I believe this is outside of my scope of expertise.
Can you tell us, looking at Plaintiff's Exhibit 32, what is distinctive about the trailer hitch that we see at the top of this picture?
Same objections.
Again, this is outside of my scope of expertise.
Isn't it true, sir, that the trailer hitch at the top of Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 is broken in two pieces?
It's what it appears to be, but it's, again, outside of my scope of expertise.
That's not good, is it?
Same objections.
That's not how it's designed.
Can you tell that the Jeep in Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 has been all burned up?
I'm not a fire expert, so I can't state that.
Well, have you seen vehicles that have been burned up before?
I have not inspected vehicles that have been on fire, no.
You've seen pictures of them, hadn't you?
I've seen pictures of vehicles on fire.
Doesn't it appear that the Jeep in Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 is all burned up?
I can't state that from,
And just let
I
the
don't
record,
have the expertise on that.
Just let the record reflect that there's a limited view of the Jeep in this Exhibit 32, just showing the undercarriage of the vehicle.
Well, to address FCA's lawyer's objection, isn't it true that the areas of the vehicle that one can see in Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 appear to be all burned up?
Again, I am not a fire expert. I cannot state that.
Well, the tank melted, didn't it?
I don't see a fuel tank.
Okay. Isn't it clear that the trailer hitch shown in Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 did not protect Miss Nevitt?
Objection form, foundation.
And you're asking me questions that are outside of my scope. I'm not a structural engineer.
Well, I mean, FCA knew all about the Nevitt collision because FCA got sued in connection with it. Then FCA gave Plaintiff's Exhibit 32 to us. You're aware of those things, aren't you?
Objection form, foundation.
My only knowledge is that you've provided this information to me today.
How many times has FCA been sued in connection with fires in these rear tank Jeeps?
Objection form and foundation.
That's outside of my scope. I do not know the answer to that.
Did you ask anybody?
No.
Who would know?
I don't know. That's outside of my scope.
Isn't it true that Chrysler or FCA executives have even testified that the tow package and trailer hitch did not protect the gas tank?
Objection, form, and foundation.
I don't know what our executives have testified in the past.
Well, you know about the president of Chrysler International, Francois Castaigne, right?
Yes, I know who Francois Castaigne was.
And you know what he said about the tow package back in 2011, don't you?
I've read a statement that he has mentioned about fuel tanks.
That statement was in a deposition, right?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Well, let's look at the document. Now, the whole deposition, which I'm handing to FCA's counsel, is over 200 pages long. So what I have as an exhibit is not going to be that long. It's going to be the relevant excerpt. And I'm showing you now what I've marked as plain as exhibit number 72. And on the front of it, it says Kahn et al. Against Morgan Alcala et al. Francois Castaigne, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we turn to the, let's see, the page of the exhibit that says page 4 in the top right, we see the name Sheila Jeffrey of the Miller Canfield firm, right?
Yes.
Are you aware she's working for FCA in this case?
In this particular case?
No, in this particular case, Gilreath. against
No, I do not know that.
Okay, well, let's turn to the next page, and you can see highlighted what it is I want to talk about. We don't need to read all this, but basically, Mr. Castaigne says that he was president of Chrysler International.
I'm going to object. Hold on. I'm going to object this whole line of questioning as improper impeachment. I don't see anything about this exhibit that is inconsistent with anything that the witnesses testified to.
Do you see there in highlighted where Mr. Castaigne says he was president of Chrysler International?
Yes.
All right. And then on the next page, he talks about being in charge of overseeing and directing business of Chrysler outside of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, overseeing 47 countries with operation, manufacturing, and sales of Chryslers around the world. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then turn to the next page, which is the last page in Plaintiff's Exhibit 72. And it says page 233 at the top right, doesn't it?
Yes.
And do you see there, in highlighting, on lines 16 and 17, where Mr. Castaigne testifies, quote, "The tow package does not protect the tank," end quote.
I see where it states that in there, on line 16, yes. 16 and 17.
Now, I want to show you another image, and this will be of the trailer hitch. In this case, pull back up that PowerPoint, which was Plaintiff's Exhibit 1003. And turn with me to page 5 of that exhibit. Do you see the blue image on the right there?
Yes.
Does it look to you like the trailer hitch protected the tank?
Objection, foundation.
And I can't, I'm not a structural engineer to answer those questions. I see a trailer hitch.
Well, just using your eyes and common sense, can't you tell that that trailer hitch speared through the area where the gas tank was?
I can't state that. Could have gone underneath the fuel tank.
Could have gone underneath the fuel tank?
I can't state from this picture. There's no side view to tell the exact location of where that hitch is.
Okay. Well, let's look at Plaintiff's Exhibit number 21, which I'll hand to you now. And I'll represent to you that Plan Exhibit 21 is another picture of Mrs. Gilreath's Jeep Liberty taken from the underside. Do you see the trailer hitch there?
Yes.
Do you see that black object underneath the trailer hitch in the perspective that the picture's taken from?
Yeah, I see some black object, yes.
You know what that is?
No, I do not.
Would you be surprised to learn that is what remains of the plastic gas tank?
Objection, Forum.
I don't know what that object is.
Well, isn't it true, sir, that Fiat Chrysler Automobiles knew before this recall, and even when these Jeeps were being produced and sold, that its customers were at risk, even if a trailer hitch was added to the vehicles?
The Jeep Liberty passed all federal requirements to be sold to our customers in the United States.
That wasn't the question. Let me try it again. Isn't it true that Fiat Chrysler Automobiles knew before this recall, and even when these Jeeps were being produced and sold, that its customers were at risk, even if a trailer hitch was added to the vehicles?
Objection, foundation beyond the scope of the witness's knowledge and expertise.
I can't state that, FCA. I don't have the knowledge. I did not work in the groups of rear fuel tanks or structures.
All right. Well, we've talked several times about your deposition in the Kahn case. You remember talking about that?
In the Klein case?
Excuse me, the White case.
The White case, yes.
Okay. If we look at the document I just handed to you, on the first page it says, in the United States District Court of the Eastern District of Michigan, and then it gives the case name of White against FCA US LLC, right?
Let's see where exactly. State of Michigan, Southern District, but
Okay, line 4 says Susan White, doesn't it?
yes, it does, yeah.
And line 10 says FCA US LLC.
Yes,
doesn't
it does, yes.
And line 17 says deponent, and that gives your name, right?
Yes.
All right, turn with me, please, to page 184. And I'll direct your attention to page 184 and line 22, where the court reporter asks a question. Do you see that?
Yes.
And tell me if I read this correctly. The question, it says, court reporter, question. So at the time the vehicle was produced in 2003, and at the time the recall was announced, FCA was aware that its customers were still at risk for post-collision fuel-fed fires even after the hitch was added. True? And there's an objection, and then your answer was, yes, that risk is still there. Did I read that correctly?
Before you answer, I'm going to object as improper impeachment. Nothing that is in this deposition transcript is inconsistent with what the witness has testified to.
Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly, but I'd have to review quite a few pages before to see the context of that question.
Well, I tell you this, if FCA's lawyer wants to review the context and ask you more questions about it, he can do that when I'm finished asking questions. We've been going about an hour. Why don't we take a quick break?
Okay.
We're going to go off the record. The time is 11:05. Back on the record at 11:14.
Isn't it true that because FCA knew this trailer hitch was going to make things worse and lead to more lawsuits, FCA dragged its feet in carrying out this so-called recall?
Objection 4, argumentative.
No, no.
Isn't it true that FCA was dragging its feet so badly that NHTSA repeatedly told FCA to hurry up?
As far as hurry up, as far as what?
With the recall.
The implementation of the recall,
Yes.
or the getting parts for the recall, or
I feel like let me see if I can ask again. I thought the question was pretty clear. And what I was trying to say is this, isn't it true that FCA was dragging its feet so badly with conducting the recall that NHTSA repeatedly told FCA to hurry up?
NHTSA had many conversations with us about the recall, implementing the recall.
And some of the stuff was in
Well,
writing.
But there was
hold on.
no
Let-
safety
let-
defect ever identified in this recall. And that was the discussion between FCA and NHTSA. There was no safety defect ever identified.
Let's look at Plaintiff's Exhibit number 44. Now, Exhibit number 44 is a letter from NHTSA to Sergio Marcioni, right?
Yes,
And Marcioni was the CEO and chairman of FCA, and before that Chrysler Group, right?
yes, he was the CEO.
Okay. Now, highlighted here, you can see what it is I wanted to talk about. Isn't it true that NHTSA wrote to Mr. Marcioni, quote, I am writing to urge Chrysler Group LLC, Chrysler, to move more aggressively, strike that. Isn't it true that NHTSA wrote to Mr. Marcioni, quote, I am writing to urge Chrysler Group LLC, Chrysler, to more aggressively seek out vehicle owners affected by the recall 13V-252 of model year 2002 to 2007 Jeep Liberty and model year 1993 to 1998 Jeep Grand Cherokee vehicles whose fuel tanks may rupture if the vehicles are struck from behind, leading to fires even in low to medium speed crashes. Did I read that right?
Objection, foundation, hearsay.
You read that first paragraph correct, yes.
And then the next highlighted part says, I am concerned about the results of Chrysler's October 2014 recall update reports showing a woeful 3% repair rate out of more than 1.5 million affected vehicles. Isn't that what it says?
Same objections.
That is what that sentence states, yes.
What is a 3% repair rate?
That would be the completion rate of the recall.
Meaning only 3% of the vehicles have been fixed by this time?
3% have had the recall completed, either a Jeep, either a hitch installed or inspected that already have an OEM factory installed hitch on the vehicle.
You correct me on something that you were right, and I appreciate it. It isn't fixed. What that means is 3% of the vehicles had had the recall performed. Is that right?
That is correct.
And then this next highlighted part says, although Chrysler has reported to us that nearly 400,000 parts are available to repair these vehicles, NHTSA has received consumer complaints expressing frustration that Chrysler is not fully cooperating and that information provided by the dealerships is confusing. Is that what it says?
Same objections.
That is a statement that's on this paper that you read, yes.
And then 6 months after this letter that's Plaintiff's Exhibit 44, NHTSA followed up with a special order to FCA demanding information about this recall process, right?
Same objections.
I remember lots of conversations with NHTSA.
Do you remember a special order demanding information about the recall process?
I don't remember if it was called a special order or not.
Okay. Let's look. Plaintiff's Exhibit 45 says in bold, underlined print, sort of toward the top of the page, special order directed to Fiat Chrysler Automobiles US LLC, doesn't it?
Yes.
And then if we turn to page 2, we can see that among the recalls this relates to is number 2, rear fuel tank structures risk of failure, 13V-252, right?
Yes.
Okay. After this special order, isn't it true that things got worse?
Objection form.
I don't understand the question of what are you referring to as things got worse.
Well, we've already gone longer than I wanted to, so in the interest of time, we're just going to go straight to the document, and I'll show you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 46. Now, highlighted on the first page of page 46, we see that same number, 13V-252, correct?
Correct, yes.
And this says consent order in bold underlined in the middle of the first page, right?
Yes.
Consent order means that FCA agreed to it and admits the stuff in it, doesn't it?
That's outside of my scope.
Okay, well, turn with me then to the second flag page of the document.
Sorry.
And the first word on that page in the top left is agreed, correct?
Correct, yes.
And then we see the signatures of Sergio Marcioni, Scott Kunselman, Marjorie Loeb, and Erica Jones, correct?
Yes.
Those are all either FCA people or lawyers for FCA, correct?
Yes.
All right, now turn with me. Well, I forgot to do something. Go back to the very first page. And the date on this document is really hard to find, but if you look in the top left, there's this long jumbled thing there, but part of it says July 27, 2015. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that in the top left.
All right, now we turn with me to the first tabbed page. And highlighted, you can see what I want to talk about.
Okay.
Doesn't paragraph 11 say that FCA US violated the Safety Act by failing to adequately remedy defective vehicles within a reasonable time in accordance with some United States code sections?
That is what is written on this document, yes.
And then in this document is also written in paragraph 12, FCA US violated the Safety Act by issuing untimely owner notifications and by failing to timely provide copies of owner and dealer notifications to NHTSA. Did I read that right?
I'm going to object on relevance grounds and foundation grounds as well.
That you read that correct, yes.
Paragraph 13 says FCA US violated the Safety Act by failing to provide timely, accurate, and complete notice to NHTSA about vehicle defects and recalls in accordance with certain laws. Isn't that what it says?
Same objection to the entire document.
That's what it states. It's in this highlighted section, yes.
And paragraph 18 tells us that a fine was levied against FCA in connection with these problems, doesn't it?
Yes.
What was the amount of that fine?
$105 million.
You were involved in the lead up to and the imposition of this fine, weren't you?
I was the recall administration manager at the time prior to this consent order, yes.
So yes, you were involved?
Yes.
All right. And then even after this, FCA got fined again in connection with its activities in relation to the recall, didn't it?
I don't know about that. I was not in the group, I don't believe, at that time.
You don't know whether FCA got fined again?
I don't recall that. I was in the group, so I wasn't following that anymore.
Okay, you didn't hear about the $70 million fine levied against your employer in connection with the recall that you had worked on?
Objection form,
I don't
relevance
remember.
foundation.
I don't remember hearing of that. I was outside of the group. I was no longer in recall administration.
Let's take a look at Plans Exhibit number 47. And on the first page of 47, we see highlighted again that same number 13V-252, right?
Correct, yes.
And if we go to the last page of Plans Exhibit 47, we see the signatures, right?
Yes.
And in the top left, it says agreed, doesn't it?
On the very last page?
On the very last page.
Yes.
Under that is the signature for FCA US LLC of Marjorie Loeb, who's a senior vice president, general counsel, right?
Yes.
And under that it has Erica Jones, who's one of FCA's lawyers, correct?
Yes.
Turn with me, please, to the first tabbed page. You're there.
Yep.
All right, and before you go, I'm going to object to this document on the same grounds as the last document.
On page 2, the first tab page of Plan Exhibit 47, doesn't it say FCA US failed to report certain death and injury incidents that were required to be reported to NHTSA under a regulatory code section?
That is what is highlighted, yes.
And then on the second tab page, the first part of the highlighting in paragraph 6, part of that says FCA US admits these violations are significant, right?
Number 6, the non-highlighted section?
No, paragraph 6 on page 3 of Plan Exhibit 47, and specifically the fourth line in paragraph 6 includes the language, FCA US admits that these violations are significant. Do you see that?
Oh, yes.
And then paragraph 7 says that there was an additional $70 million fine levied against FCA US, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, isn't it true that FCA dragged its feet so badly in connection with this trailer hitch recall that the fines that it paid exceeded the expected cost of the recall?
Objection form misleading.
I have no knowledge of what the overall cost of this recall would have been.
Well, you've been asked about that before and testified about it before, haven't you?
I don't remember the cost of this campaign.
Okay, well,
I do not generate the cost of a campaign.
first let's add up those fines. $105 million plus $70 million would be $175 million, right?
Correct.
Objection form misleading.
Isn't it true that the expected cost of this trailer hitch recall was only $151 million?
I don't know the cost of this campaign, the estimated cost of this campaign.
Look, if you okay. Now, $175 million is more than $151 million, isn't it?
Yes.
What would it have cost Fiat Chrysler Automobiles to buy back all of these Jeep Liberties?
I don't know what that cost would have been.
Did y'all talk about that?
At the time of the implementation of the recall,
Well, at any time.
When the recall was started, I do not remember any types of conversations with that.
Do you have any approximation as to what it would have cost FCA to buy back all of these Jeep Liberties with the rear gas tanks?
No, I do not. That's not within my scope.
Well, do you agree that there were about 973,000 of these Jeep Liberties still on the road at the time of the recall?
From this document sitting in front of me, that's the number that's on this document.
But do you dispute that number?
I have no knowledge of, as of today, what the number would be, but
Well, let's just take a quick
that's
look.
what's on this document. I'm assuming we went through extensive study to figure out how many vehicles were still on the road.
Let's confirm. I'm showing you now Plan as Exhibit number 1. And this has the Chrysler logo at the top, right?
Yes.
Do you recognize this as the dealer instructions for the recall on the Liberties?
Yes, the repair instructions for the dealers, yes.
And then under subject there in the middle of the first page, it says the rear vehicle structure on about 973,000 of the vehicles may allow fuel leakage during certain low-speed collisions.
Yes,
Is that what it says?
yes.
All right. Now, I was hoping that you would have an approximate cost of buying them back. But in case you didn't, I came with some other stuff for us to look at. And I'm going to show you now what I've marked as Plan as Exhibit number 9. And this is a copy of some pages out of Kelley Blue Book. You know what Kelley Blue Book is, don't you?
Yes.
Well, hold on. Object to the form of the question.
You know what Kelley Blue Book is, don't you?
I'm aware of Kelley Blue Book.
All right. It's used by normal people to find the approximate cost of vehicles, right?
Yes.
I've got the full book here with me today in case someone wants to look at it, but for ease of the court report and everything else, I just pulled the relevant pages out. You can see at the bottom of the first page of Plan Exhibit 9, it says this is the blue book from July to September 2015, right?
Yes.
Recall was going on at that time, right?
Yes.
And if we turn to the second page, I picked the 2004 Jeep Liberty just because that's in the middle of the 02 to 07 range. But do you see the highlighted figures there?
Yes.
And that's under the 2004 Jeep Liberty section, right?
Yes.
Now, if I tell you that the average of those highlighted figures is $3,902, will you trust me on that, or do you want to use the calculator and check me?
Of all the figures?
Of the highlighted figures.
Of all the highlighted figures, I'm
Uh-huh.
sorry. I will take your word that it's 3,900 roughly.
Okay, 3,900 works. Now, what happens if you multiply $3,900 times 973,000?
I don't know that number.
I will hand you my phone. You have to turn it sideways or it won't have enough room to display all the digits. But I'll ask you to do that, to multiply 973,000 times $3,900.
Okay.
What's the answer?
It looks like $3,794,700,000.
A little over 3.7 billion?
Yes.
With a B?
Yes, sir.
Now, what was cheaper for FCA? Putting trailer hitches on some of the Jeeps or buying them back?
Objection, form, foundation, argumentative.
The estimated number of 151 million is less than the 3.7 billion.
Were you able to get that last bit?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to go over.
Isn't it true that these Jeeps were leaking fuel even in low-speed collisions?
I was not part of the investigation team, so I can't state that.
Well, you did work on the dealer notice, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's pull back up Plans Exhibit 1. It should be, yep, you got it right there. And we'll return to this sentence under subject. It says the rear vehicle structure on about 973,000 of the above vehicles may allow fuel leakage during certain low-speed collisions, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if the Jeeps can leak even at low speed, what happens at moderate speed collisions?
There's various different things that could happen to a vehicle at moderate or high speeds. We cannot predict every type of scenario of accident out in the real world.
Well, I guess I'll just ask you this. If fuel leakage can occur in low-speed collisions, then at what speed are the Jeeps safe?
Our Jeeps are all safe because they met all federal requirements.
Well, let me put it this way. Isn't it true that what FCA told its customers in the recall letters that it did send out is that all the trailer hitch would do was manage crash forces in low-speed impacts?
If I could see the owner letter.
Sure, it's Plans Exhibit 160. And you'll find it highlighted there.
To manage crash forces and low-speed impacts.
Yeah. So, what's supposed to happen to people who get rear-ended at moderate or high speeds?
Again, we cannot predict for every type of scenario of accident out there of what's going to happen. We put in there that the trailer hitch will help in managing forces and low-speed impacts. But in a high-speed impact, there's no way I can predict exactly, or anybody can predict exactly what's going to happen. What speeds are we talking about?
Well, tell me, what speed, when FCA says low-speed impacts, what does FCA mean?
Lower speeds. I don't have an exact number for what's established as a low speed.
Okay. Well,
All I know is our vehicles met 301 at the time. So if that speed was 30 miles per hour, then that's what we tested, and we verified our cars to pass the requirements.
Does low speed mean 30 miles an hour or less?
I don't have a specific number that is established low speed. That is not my job to establish that number.
Well, I'll give you some good news. I'm not going to press you on that point. But I do want to know this. As a matter of common sense, if the tank fails at low speeds, won't it also fail at moderate speeds?
Again, every accident's going to be different. We put the hitch on there to reference to people that at low speeds it can help manage forces. We're not stating that this trailer hitch is a savior and is going to handle every type of high-speed impact in the real world. I can't predict that. Nobody can predict that.
We agree, I think, that FCA told its customers that the trailer hitch would only help in low-speed impacts. Is that right?
Objection misstates the document.
We said it would help manage forces and low-speed impacts.
Well, is it okay for people who happen to get rear-ended at moderate speeds to burn to death?
I don't want to see anybody burn. We don't design cars for people to burn.
What has FCA done to protect people who get rear-ended at moderate or high speeds
Objection.
in these rear tank Jeeps?
Objection. Foundation.
FCA designs cars to meet all federal requirements and our internal requirements.
No, that wasn't the question. What has FCA done to protect people and their families who are riding around in these rear tank Jeeps and who may get rear-ended at moderate or high speeds?
Objection. Foundation.
Again, we meet all federal requirements. That's all I can state. If you're asking exactly what the structure does or tanks and how they're designed, that is totally outside of my scope. But we meet all requirements to meet the minimum requirements from the federal government and the internal requirements at FCA to sell our vehicles on the road.
Does FCA have any plans to do anything that will help people riding around in these rear tank Jeeps who might get rear-ended at moderate or high speeds?
Objection. Foundation.
It's outside of my scope.
Has anyone else told you of any plans to do anything for those people?
I have not talked to anybody about any type of plan, no.
Well, you agree. I mean, FCA knows that anybody can be rear-ended, right?
Anybody and any car can be rear-ended, yes.
And people can be rear-ended at moderate speed, can't they?
Certainly,
They can be rear-ended at high speed, can't they?
certainly.
Isn't it true that other automakers have expressed some doubt even about Fiat's claim that the trailer hitch helps in low-speed collisions?
Objection. Foundation.
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
Yep. Isn't it true that the engineers of other automakers have expressed some doubt even about Fiat's claim that the trailer hitch helps in low-speed collisions?
I have no knowledge of that.
Let me show you what's been marked as Plans Exhibit number 73. Plan 73 says SAE Technical Paper Series in the top left, correct?
Yes,
You know what SAE is?
yes,
It's an organization where auto engineers, particularly those that work for automakers, publish papers, right?
yes.
Turn with me, if you would, to the tabbed page in Plans Exhibit 73, which at the bottom left says page 6 of 6. Are you there?
Yes.
Now, on the top right, I've just highlighted the part of the email addresses of the authors. All those say at gm.com, don't they?
I'm sorry, say it again?
Yep. On the top right, I've highlighted parts of the email addresses of the authors of this document. And all six of them say at gm.com, right?
Yes.
And on the left, in enumeration 5, doesn't it say the results found on this paper show the common notion of the trailer hitch as protection device for low-speed rear impact is false?
I'm going to object as irrelevant and on foundation and improper impeachment.
Isn't that what it says?
That is what is highlighted. Yes.
What would have happened, do you think, if FCA had told the whole truth to its customers?
Objection form.
FCA told our customers what the safety risk was, what the problem was, what you needed to do, what Chrysler would do, or FCA would do to repair this condition. We met all the requirements for a safety recall.
None of FCA's letters to customers or dealers warned anyone that the Jeeps could explode and be entirely consumed by flames, did they?
Our letters stated that the condition could result in a fire.
Did any of them say that the Jeeps could explode and be entirely consumed by flames?
No, we said that it could result in a fire.
Did any of them say that the seat back could fail and bystanders might be unable to pull you from the flames?
No, our letter does not state that.
If
We put the safety condition of a fire being the highest priority.
If FCA had wanted to, FCA could have included a picture like the one in Plans Exhibit 34 in the recall notice, couldn't it?
We don't put pictures in our owner letters.
Is there anything that would prevent FCA from sending a picture like this to owners of Jeeps, whether in a recall letter or in some other form?
There's nothing to prevent it, but I don't understand why we would put something like this in an owner letter.
Isn't it true that if FCA had chosen to do it, it could have put something like the picture in Plans Exhibit 35 in the recall notice that it sent to customers?
Again, as I stated, we don't put pictures in our owner letter.
Is there anything that would have prevented FCA from sending that picture to owners if it had decided to do so?
No, but it's not a requirement to have that in owner letters by our federal government. Again, our owner letters are written consistently for every safety recall that we implement, and they're reviewed by the federal government for their approval.
Isn't it true that FCA could have sent a picture like the one marked as Exhibit 36 to its customers if it had chosen to do so?
It'd be the same answer. We don't put these in our recalls.
Well, don't you think that putting a picture like that in Plans Exhibit 34 or 35 or 36 in the recall letter might have increased the recall completion rate, that is, made people get into their dealers a little bit faster?
I don't know if that would have increased the completion rates.
Well, if you were a Jeep owner and you saw a picture of a burning Jeep like in Plans Exhibit 35, you think that would get your attention?
Objection, speculation.
The word fire gets my attention.
Do you think the picture in 35 would be attention grabbing?
To some, maybe, yes.
Now, for the record, Plans Exhibit 34 showed a 2004 Jeep livery that was driven by Candy Giro in New York and that burned up on September 30, 2005. Had you reviewed that picture in connection with your work on the recall?
That's outside of the scope of the administration of the recall.
So you did not
No,
review the picture?
I did not.
Well, Plans Exhibit 35, for the record, showed a 2005 Jeep livery that was driven by Travis Persinger in West Virginia and that burned up on September 13, 2001. Had you seen that picture in connection with your work on the recall?
No, again, that's outside the scope of my administration responsibilities.
Plans Exhibit 36 showed a 2006 Jeep livery that was driven by Nestor Cubides in Georgia and that burned up on November 11, 2006. Had you seen that picture in connection with your work on the recall?
Same answer. I did not review these pictures. That's outside of my scope.
like to go back to Plaintiff's Exhibit 160, which I see you've got in front of you. That's FCA's, or at least one of FCA's recall notices, right?
Yes.
And at the bottom, you see where it says what you must do to ensure your safety is contact your Chrysler Jeep or Dodge dealer right away.
Yes.
Now, that's just not a true statement, is it?
I don't understand the question.
Well, isn't it true that contacting your dealer to get one of these hitches put on would not, in fact, ensure your safety?
It states to contact your dealer to schedule a service appointment,
Isn't it true?
to have the recall completion, the recall remedy completed. That's to ensure your safety.
Isn't it true that getting that hitch put on there would not ensure your safety?
No, that's not true. We put the hitch on there to manage forces and low-speed impacts. Again, as I stated before, we cannot establish every condition that's going to happen for a moderate or high-speed impact.
Isn't it true that FCA knew that owners, drivers, and occupants of these rear tank Jeeps were at risk for post-collision fuel-fed fires even after the hitch was added?
Objection asked and answered.
I'm sorry, I need that read again. Asked again.
Isn't it true that FCA knew that owners, drivers, and occupants of these rear tank Jeeps were at risk for post-collision fuel-fed fires even after the hitch was added?
And again, we cannot predict on every scenario of a rear impact what's going to happen with that vehicle.
The customers were still at risk with the hitch, weren't they?
The customer is at risk for a rear impact of any type of vehicle that could result in that condition.
Isn't it true that FCA did not inform its customers that even with the hitch, they were still at risk for post-collision fuel-fed fires?
We stated in our owner letter that there's a risk of a fire and low-speed impacts. We did not put in there about high-speed impacts, because we cannot predict what's going to happen in high-speed impact.
I'm going to show you what I've marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 71. Do you recognize the first page here of your deposition transcript from the Kayla White case?
Yes.
Turn with me to the next page of Plaintiff's Exhibit, or excuse me, the third page of, excuse me, the fourth page of Plaintiff's Exhibit 71. And do you see there that this shows deposition pages 184 and 185?
Yes.
Part of this we've reviewed before, but part of it we have not. Tell me if I read this correctly. Court reporter asked this question, quote, "So at the time the vehicle was produced in 2003, and at the time the recall was announced, FCA was aware that its customers were still at risk for post-collision fuel-fed fires even after the hitch was added. True?" There's an objection, and your answer was yes, that risk is still there. And then the next question is, and the customers were not so informed, were they? There's an objection, and then you responded, quote, "No, we did not have a statement like that in the letter," end quote. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you read that correctly.
That's all the questions I have.
All right, Mr. Bernier, I just have some brief follow-up questions based on some of the topics that you discussed with Mr. Butler. You are not a fuel system engineer, I think you said. Is that right?
That is correct. I am not.
And I think you mentioned on several occasions that you are likewise not a vehicle structure engineer or expert. Is that right?
No, I am not.
Okay. And you did not have any personal involvement in the development and testing and certification and so forth of the KJ Liberty vehicle. Is that fair?
No, I did not.
And you were, the particular involvement you had was limited, as I understand your testimony, to the administration of the recall after it was announced.
Objection leading.
Okay. What was your role with regard to the KJ Liberty?
For the recall, my role was to establish the recall repair procedures, and write those repair procedures for our dealers, generate the owner letters, and then establish what the number of parts we thought we would need for that particular campaign.
Okay.
And that's the same on every recall.
Okay. And you talked a little bit with Mr. Butler about the owner notification letter. Get that up. Well,
Let's see. I got it.
And was it your group who worked on this letter?
My group authored this letter, yes.
Okay. And did you work with individuals at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration on the language that would be in that letter?
Yes, when we generate the first draft of an owner letter, we review it internally, and we also send the draft to NHTSA for their review, and they will sometimes make suggestions for us to correct, or it's really a lot of wordsmithing, or they would just give us approval for the letter.
And have you worked in your role as a recall administrator with NHTSA on letters like this involving other recalls?
Yes.
Okay. And fair to say a number of times on a number of different recalls?
A large number of recalls.
Okay.
Yes.
And based on your personal knowledge, having worked with NHTSA on the language of recall letters, do you have personal knowledge as to what information is required and desired by NHTSA to be in those letters?
Yeah, there's a requirement for a letter. There's certain statements that you must have. You must have a problem statement. You must have the risk to the customer, what the failure, what the safety risk to the customer is, what the company's going to do to correct the safety defect. Again, in this recall, there was no safety defect identified. And then there's also information that you have to put on as far as what the customer can contact Chrysler or even contact NHTSA if they have some questions of the recall or complaints or anything like that.
And is there a concern expressed by folks at NHTSA with the negative effects of providing too much information in an owner notification letter?
Yeah, we try to keep our owner letters down to let's say the minimum requirements, for sure to meet those requirements by NHTSA, but we don't want to add too much more into our owner letters because people tend to not read them. So we try to keep our statements down clear, as concise as we can, to make sure that customers will read the condition. We even highlight in bolded font the more important sections of the letter to try to have them focus for sure onto those areas, and that is what the problem is and what the corrective action is and what we will do to their vehicles to correct the action.
And do you understand, and just so the record's clear, do you understand that in fact Deanna Gilreath had the recall performed on her vehicle prior to her accident?
Yes.
And do you have an understanding as to when that was performed?
June, I think it was June of 2015.
Okay. And you understand that is within a month of when the accident occurred?
I don't remember the exact date of the accident.
I'll object.
Fair
That's
enough.
factually incorrect. This wreck was in October 2017.
Your objection is well taken. Mr. Butler points out my mistake. I think I meant to ask you that the recall was performed within a month of when she received the letter, the final letter that you discussed.
Objection to the extent that implies that Ms. Gilbert received a letter which is not received the letter, which is not a matter that is in evidence.
Mr. Bernier, have you determined whether or not a letter went out to the Gilreath from Chrysler indicating the information here on Plaintiff's Exhibit 160?
To the best of my knowledge, we matched up the owner of this particular vehicle and the address for this customer. That letter was printed and sent into the United States Postal Office for delivery to this customer.
And when do Chrysler's records indicate that that letter went out?
I believe somewhere around May of 2015.
Okay, and so that would have been, that's what I was thinking about. That would have been within a month of when she actually had the recall performed.
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Butler asked you about a bunch of photographs from other accidents and asked you whether or not you put those photographs in the recall letter. Well, first let me ask you, you had talked about submitting the proposed language for the owner letter to NHTSA. Did NHTSA at any time, well, first of all, did NHTSA approve the language?
Yeah, yes, they gave us approval for the letter because we sent the letter out.
Okay. And did NHTSA, anybody at NHTSA in your discussions with them in the process for getting the letter approved, ever suggest that any photographs of any particular accidents be included in the letter?
No.
And Mr. Butler asked whether you had ever reviewed these photographs, and I think you testified that that was beyond the scope of your role. Are there individuals and engineers at Chrysler who investigate accidents?
Yes, there are.
Okay. And whose role it would be to review information concerning accidents involving Jeep vehicles?
Whose role? What group would be responsible?
Yeah, are there individuals there?
Yeah, yes, there are individuals there.
Okay. Now, you were asked some questions. Bear with me here, Mr. Bernier. Let's see if we can get through your stuff real quick here. You were asked some questions by Mr. Butler about the trailer hitch in the subject accident spearing the fuel tank. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
Okay. And just so the jury is clear on this, you have not investigated this particular accident, is that right?
No, I have not.
You have a general idea of what happened in the accident?
I know that there was a rear impact that resulted in, unfortunately, a fire and death.
Are you aware of the fact that the plaintiff's own hired expert agrees that the trailer hitch did not spear the fuel tank in this case?
No.
Objection, foundation of the state's testimony.
Does it surprise you to find out that the plaintiff's own hired expert has concluded that the trailer hitch did not spear the fuel tank in light of the questions you were asked by Mr. Butler?
Same objection.
I guess I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay. The plaintiff's counsel was asking you whether or not you thought, looking at the photographs, that the trailer hitch in the Gilreath vehicle speared the fuel tank. Mm-hmm. Does it surprise you to find out that he was asking you those questions when his own hired expert has concluded that the trailer hitch did not spear the fuel tank?
Objection, misstates testimony.
Yes.
Okay. You were asked some questions about some consent orders and a letter from NHTSA regarding various recalls. Did those issues involve only the recall of the KJ?
The consent order was involved a number of other recalls.
Okay. And again, irrespective of what those letters and consent orders may have said, Ms. Gilreath did have the recall performed, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And based on all the metrics that people judge, based on your understanding of recall administration, having been the recall manager, based on the metrics that people use in the industry to judge the success of recalls, was the recall that Chrysler did on the KJ Liberty to install the trailer hitch a success?
Yes.
Okay. Explain that.
Well, because our completion rates, we have pretty high completion rates for the KJ, roughly 80-something%, over 80% complete for the recall, which for these type of model years vehicles, these older vehicles, is very, very good, a very good number.
Okay. You were shown an SAE paper. It was marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 73-HL, and you were asked to go back to the second to last page, and you were asked about one sentence in this exhibit. Do you recall that, the sentence being, "The results found on this paper show the common notion of the trailer hitch as a protection device for low-speed rear impact is false"?
Yes.
Okay. If I could, because Mr. Butler didn't ask you, if I could have you read the sentence that I have circled here under the abstract section of the paper.
This work has an objective to study the influence of the trailer hitch in the body structure of small hatchback passenger vehicle during rear impacts.
Okay. Is the Jeep Liberty a small hatchback passenger vehicle?
No, it's more of a mid-size.
Okay. And is the KJ Liberty at all a part of this study, as you can tell by looking at it?
I don't know. I'd have to read the entire study.
Okay. You've been involved, I understand from your testimony, in the auto industry for some time. Is that right, sir?
Yes, over 25 years.
And a good number of those years you were involved in recall administration and a number of safety recalls over a wide range of vehicles. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
And that involved working with NHTSA, NHTSA?
Yes.
Okay, and just for the jury's benefit, they'll probably have heard about this numerous times during travel. Just explain what NHTSA is.
NHTSA is the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration.
Okay. And that is the regulatory body that regulates the automotive industry?
Yes.
Okay. In all the
Start
work...
objecting to leading. I don't make an objection to the last one, but it's coming.
Okay. In all the work and all that you've done and all your dealings with NHTSA, have you ever heard of any vehicle made by any manufacturer that isn't subject to the risk of a fuel tank fire?
No.
And did Chrysler ever tell its owners, its customers, that its vehicle, by virtue of the trailer hitch, would be immune from the risk of a post-collision fuel-fed fire?
No, we put in there that we could help manage forces in low-speed impacts.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
You've worked at FCA for 25 years, I think you said,
Over 25 years, yes.
and you are an engineer, right?
Yes, I am.
You've been involved in work on recalls for much of your time at FCA, right?
A large number of years, yes.
And you were involved in the recall on the Liberties, right?
Yes, I was.
Involved in that $105 million fine, right?
Yes.
When FCA's lawyer was asking you questions about the one of the versions of the recall notice that we talked about here today, you said, I think, quote, people tend not to read them, end quote. Do I remember that right?
Oh, I stated that if you add too much information on, you start losing customers, and they might not read the entire letter, yes.
You ever heard the phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words?
Yes, I've heard that phrase.
How many words do you think the picture in Plans Exhibit 35 is worth?
Objection 4.
I don't know if I can't put a number to that.
Well, if FCA were to send out to hundreds of thousands of customers a picture like the one shown in Plans Exhibit 35, don't you think that would hurt FCA's ability to sell more Jeeps?
Objection. Foundation. Calls for speculation.
I can't answer that question. We put in our owner letters the risk, and that is a fire. Everyone knows that a fire can be something quite dangerous.
Now, you mentioned today, for what I believe was the first time, that FCA has charted that it sent a letter to Deanna Gilreath. Do you remember talking about that?
We matched up the VIN to an address, and we mailed to a specific address.
All right, well, let's look
That's
at
what I stated.
Plans Exhibit number 160, which I'm pulling out for you. That's the recall letter that we've been talking about today, right?
This is a copy of a recall letter, yes.
Yeah, and it says, this notice applies to your vehicle, VIN, and then it has a bunch of X's, right?
Yes.
And then it says, dear, open parenthesis, name, close parenthesis, right?
Yes.
Do you have one of these that has Deanna Gilreath's name on it?
No, that is all done at the final printing when it goes out. This is the generic letter that we send to the federal government for review, and that is automatically fed in, all those X's and the name.
Do you have the copy of one of these letters that has her VIN on it?
No, I do not. I have the generic number.
When is FCA going to produce the documents that prove one of these letters went out to the Gilreaths?
Objection. Form. Argumentative.
Do you know?
Our process is that we match the name of the customer up to the VIN and the address to the VIN. That is given to our mailer when they print the letter, and it goes directly into the United States Post Office.
Did you know that you've worked with lawyers on discovery matters before, I think. Do I remember that right?
Yes.
Did you know that twice in this case, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles has been ordered to produce the documents that plaintiff requested?
Objection. Form. Argumentative. Foundation.
Did you know that?
That's outside. I don't know all the stuff, all the documents have been requested.
Did you bring with you today the documents proving that the Gilreaths received some recall notice from FCA?
I can state that we put the letter addressed to that customer in the United States Post Office. From there, the United States Post Office delivers the mail.
I'm going to repeat my question. Did you bring with you today the documents proving that the Gilreath family received some recall notice from FCA?
It's the owner letter that we're looking at with their VIN and their name and address on it.
You just picked up Plans Exhibit 160, correct?
That's correct.
And that one has VIN XXXX and dear name on it. Isn't that what it says?
Yes.
Did you bring one that has their stuff on it?
No, that is printed at our mailing when it goes into the mail.
If you come across the documents proving that that occurred, will you send them to us through your lawyers?
Objection. Form.
I don't work in that group anymore. I don't work the mailer. I don't know if we use that mailer anymore.
Didn't you just claim you'd seen the documents?
I said I've seen the days that we've matched up the address to that VIN, that customer.
Where are the documents proving that that occurred?
Objection. Form. Argumentative.
Where are they?
I don't have those documents with me.
Well, all right. We'll move on. You were asked a bunch of questions about NHTSA allegedly approving what FCA did. Do you remember those questions?
I said that we send the letters, draft letters to NHTSA, and they will either provide changes that they would like to see, or they just approve the letter.
Isn't it true that with respect to this recall, it was Fiat Chrysler Automobiles and not NHTSA that decided what action to take?
It was Fiat Chrysler's decision to conduct the safety recall, yes.
Yeah, and Fiat Chrysler Automobiles decided what corrective action to take, not NHTSA. Isn't that true?
It's Fiat Chrysler's determines the corrective action for every recall. NHTSA does not have the authority or knowledge to come up with a corrective action for any of our recall campaigns.
So the Hitch was FCA's idea, right?
Yes.
Now, you testified, I believe, when FCA's lawyer was asking you questions, that this recall was a success.
For completion rates.
Did you say it was a success?
I don't know that I used the term success. I think I stated it had a high completion rate.
Well, okay. Regardless of what you said or didn't say before, I'm going to show you again Plans Exhibit number 21, which is a picture of Deanna Guillory's Jeep. Does that look like a success to you?
Objection, improper impeachment.
Again, our recall was done to help manage forces and low speeds. And a high-speed impact, we did not state in our letter that we can predict every type of scenario that's going to handle and protect that vehicle for every scenario that could happen in the real world.
My question was whether the picture in Plans Exhibit 21 looks like success to you.
Objection, asked and answered.
As far as having the recall complete, that is correct.
No further questions.
I don't have any further questions.
All right, we're going to go off record. The time is 12:13.